All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the official launch of the BD protocol. We are expecting over 100 people to attend this launch of the BD protocol. So just to start off with, we're going to have a few housekeeping rules for everybody. Please stay on mute. The host of the meeting will also manage this. If you do have any questions for any of the panelists or questions in general, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. It is in the middle at the bottom of the screen. You'll see there's a chat and then there's a Q&A box. The Q&A box is at the bottom of the screen. So please use the Q&A section down there. The questions will be typed in there, and we will monitor them as we go along. Once completed with all the presentations, we will try and answer as many of the questions as possible. So thank you very much for that. If anybody is unclear, please just type questions in there at the moment. All right. Yes, so yeah, we're here today to officially launch the BD protocol. It's a process that started in mid-2018, and it was quite extensive consulting process. And yeah, we are here today due to largely our main sponsors of the BD protocol, which is Eskom. We'll also hear a little bit later from Eskom. Then they will present on their pilot studies at both Anguilla and Siri, two of their sites, and then also the Nedbank Green Trust, who also sponsored some of the work to be done around the BD protocol, and then not forgetting the 42 co-authors, which also contributed to the BD protocol. But yeah, so thank you everybody for joining. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the Chief Executive Officer of the Endangered Wildlife Trust, or the EWT, Jolan Friedman. Thanks, Jolan.
Thanks, Constant. Morning, everyone. I'm just quickly trying to sort out my screen sharing. There's the joys of online, so just give me a second and I will kickstart. Right, are we sharing? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Apologies for the delay. Just it seems my connection is quite slow on my side today. So good morning, everyone, and it's wonderful to have everybody online. As Constant says, we're expecting about 100 people and around the world. So I only speak English. I'm sure everybody else does, but it's wonderful to have people from multiple countries, languages and interest levels on board this morning. So my name is Jolan and I'm the Chief Executive of the Endangered Wildlife Trust. We're a conservation NGO based out of South Africa, but operating in about 13 countries across the subcontinent in Africa. While our focus in terms of our name, and you can tell, is predominantly threatened wildlife species and their ecosystems or habitats, we understand, as do all of you on this call today, that one of the primary drivers of biodiversity loss globally is, of course, the business and development sectors. And so we have a long and rich history of working with business development, corporates and industry to reduce their impact and coexist in a more harmonious nature with nature. So that is the background to your host organization today. So why the Biological Diversity Protocol? Well, I'm sure most of you are fully aware of the need for this tool, but it's probably important for us to revisit some of the drivers that led the EWT to go down this road. As I said, we understand that business is directly dependent on biodiversity to service the needs of not just their clients in terms of their consumer base, but also their shareholders and the broader human species as a whole. We know that activities of industries are one of the primary drivers of biodiversity loss worldwide. And in our engagements with companies over 25 years or longer, we are very, very well versed in the fact that biodiversity loss is a material risk as well to the company, not just a concern for humanity and for conservation and wildlife and ecosystems, but also is becoming increasingly considered a material risk to businesses. We know there's a lack of awareness and capacity to understand these risks, and I will show you later on a slide where we unpack this a little bit more. But primarily, the lack is actually in terms of the tools to support businesses. So it's all very well that one raises the level of awareness and gets companies talking about biodiversity, but without a tool to actually help them measure and reduce their impact, those conversations become futile. There are multiple tools globally that people have been using to attempt to try and measure biodiversity impact in the business and development sectors. But we understood that there was a lack of standardized, comparable and useful information so that external stakeholders could also understand these drivers of biodiversity and to create meaningful change in companies. So by measuring biodiversity impacts and valuing the associated risks to businesses, we believe that companies are better able to effectively manage their risks. And of course, fundamental to all of this is transparency. We live in an age where shareholder activism, consumerism around greener products, etc., drives a stronger need for companies to be able to transparently disclose their information and allow better decision making. The recently released Global Risks Report of 2021 is very interesting in that it continues to show trends that started in the last 3 iterations of this Global Risks Report, which showed an increasing awareness amongst decision makers worldwide that were polled for this report, of the awareness and the risk and also the probability of the impact of the natural environment for the business sector. And so it was very evident coming out of the current report that's on the table that natural resource loss, biodiversity loss, climate inaction, and therefore climate change and extreme weather are predominantly featuring in the discussions and amongst the risk assessments that are undertaken corporate decisions globally in terms of both their level of impact as well as the likelihood of happening. And if you have a look, this trend has been increasing in the last few years with every annual iteration of the Global Risk Report. If you look at this slide, it will show you at the bottom from 2012 up to about 2016, we saw a smattering of environmental issues, predominantly really sitting in the climate space, but an absolute unawareness of biodiversity loss and natural disasters and the impact of those on businesses, and certainly in terms of assessing risk to businesses going forward. From 2016, we started to see that change, and we started to see discussions around extreme weather and natural disasters. And then, of course, we started to see around about last year, 2020, an emergence of the consideration of biodiversity loss. And for the first time that it appeared in these dialogues, it shot up very high in terms of already being the third most significant risk conceptualized by business decision makers globally. If you dig into this report, you will see that these issues are still considered to be slightly in the medium to middle to long term. So when it comes to assessing risks over the next 5 to 10 years, these are not necessarily the most imminent risks, particularly in a year where we saw things like pandemics and disease issues affecting the world. But what's just as important is they're also going to take probably longer than that 5 to 10 year time span in which one can do anything about them, which is why the urgency issue becomes so significant. So in embarking on this project and in preparing for this, we decided as the Endangered Wildlife Trust with our partners, and particularly our partner Eskom, a state-owned enterprise in South Africa, we embarked on a process of assessing the biodiversity performance of South African companies listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And you will notice that obviously when we started down this road, the reporting scores were extremely low. Even with the second iteration of the study, the scores continued to be low. We didn't expect them to change, albeit that we hoped there would be some improvement after the first assessment because the conversations had begun and perhaps companies were better able to start understanding some of the questions that we were posing to them in the first iteration. I'm not going to go into the details, but I think the questions are very important here because we were asked some really basic questions of these companies around the biodiversity policies in the company, the biodiversity dependencies and impacts. And I think that's a really critical question because it's really difficult for a company to respond on both their biodiversity policy as well as what they're doing to reduce their footprint if they don't even understand their own biodiversity dependencies and impacts in the company. So particularly low score there is understandable, but also is the starting point of a conversation moving forward. Thereafter, it would stem that most companies, if they at least are understanding their biodiversity impacts and dependencies, would be in a position to look at how to measure their company impacts. But naturally, that was a very low score as well. We also pose questions around the companies valuing their biodiversity dependencies. What are their most material ones, and then starting to enter into the dialogue around risk. We looked at their biodiversity strategy, targets, and associated KPIs, whether they had an action plan, does the company disclose its biodiversity risk and performance, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, in the days of social media, shareholder activism, etc., these are becoming things that if companies don't disclose them, others will do it on their behalf. And then finally, we looked at whether companies have a biodiversity monitoring system in place. And so I think the results were very, very self-explanatory, telling us that there's a lot of work to be done. But the importance of this was it opened a conversation. So we could start engaging these companies along the lines of the theory of change that we would like to see happening. And so this has been a long road working with many of these companies, not all of them at the same level. Some of them showed a greater interest after these surveys than others, but there has definitely been an interest in developing a community of awareness both within the company as well as its broader shareholder and stakeholder activism environment around creating an urgent dialogue for change. And our theory of change moves through creating that conversation, creating awareness in the company, starting to agree on a vision, building an understanding and a buy-in as to what has to be done, and also understanding those material risks and impacts that we mentioned earlier. Building the capacity to address it, driving content, and then as we see the theory of change graph moving forward, it's about establishing partnerships and confirming the vision and implementing collective action to reduce the impact in the company. So we have a long road to go, and we just are at this point sharing with you some of the tools that we have developed that will hopefully start moving us in the right direction. So I'm not going into detail about the BD protocol, that's for Joel to be doing later, but just to give you a little snapshot of the process that's led us to this point. As Constant mentioned, in 2018, we shared the initial concept with a network of our peers. Throughout the course of 2019, we developed the draft. There was an online consultation which was hosted by one of our partners, the Natural Capital Coalition, which is an incredibly valuable tool and resource, and it's also the way in which we brought many of you attendees with us here today on board to become co-authors and participants in this process. There were several events and workshops that were hosted, lots of direct stakeholder engagement, and the stakeholder feedback was produced at the end of 2019. The finalization of the BD protocol happened in early 2020, resulting in the copy editing design and the final production of the BDP with the input of 44 co-authors and contributors. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I'm going to end with what I generally don't do, and that's a slightly wordy slide, but I'd like you to take note of what's written in this slide, because this is an extract of an email exchange between Dr. Joel Houdet and myself. Joel, you probably don't even remember writing this. This was 10 years ago. Hang on half a second. Apologies, everyone. I had a barking dog next to me, but it's given you time to read the email. Joel is one of the most visionary people that I've ever met, and certainly in the world of biodiversity and business. I think all kudos has to be given to Joel for being such an extraordinary visionary partner, and we are very, very privileged to have walked this long road with you to this point, Joel. This was an email exchange dating 10 years ago, in which you shared with me some of your passionate ideas around raising business awareness through web-based tools, workshops, and seminars, etc., for business engagement. Promoting cutting-edge tools, standardizing a biodiversity footprint methodology for business, promoting biodiversity and ecosystem service key performance indicators for integrated reporting, promoting close cooperation between business and research, and finally, developing an accounting tool for quantifying the economic benefits of sound ecological management of biodiversity assets in industries. And I think that I put this as the way forward, because albeit that this discussion was held 10 years ago and some of these things have partly been achieved, there is still so much more to be done in the space. And if this is the thinking that some of our visionary partners have had for the last 10 years, then this is very much still the way forward. There's still a lot to be done in this space. There's still a lot to be achieved, but there's even bigger visions to be achieved if we can do this collaboratively and move forward again with another vision that takes us for another 10 years. So in closing, it's opportune for me to thank all of our partners. Constant will be going over that in a bit more detail later. And also just to acknowledge the visionary input of someone like Joel, who's now going to share with you really what has been his baby and his passion for the last 10 years. But this is just the start. This is a tool, and it's up to all of us to see how we use it to really make changes that we want for a greener future going forward. Thank you, everyone. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Yalan. It was great to take a bit of a trip down memory lane. And yeah, our next speaker needs no introduction. Yalan's already given quite a thorough introduction to Joel O'Day, who's going to take us through the biological diversity protocol itself. Joel, I've known Joel for over 10 years and been part of this journey with Joel. And just to emphasize what Yalan said earlier, real visionary, and it's been a real pleasure, and really looking forward to sharing this all with you. Over to you, Joel.
Hi, hello, can you hear me? Hope so. Hopefully you can see my screen. Hi everybody, thank you for joining us. I believe we are more than 100 people, so I'm very pleased with the turnaround. Thank you very much for the team for making this possible. This is far from a single people's exercise. It's been a very long journey. Many people have been involved, and I'm glad to be able to share part of that journey with some of you today. But without any more introduction, I just want to get into the biological diversity protocol. This is going to be a very high-level explanation, very high-level presentation of its key principles and components. And I encourage you to have a look at it. It's online at that website, nbbn.bdp.org/protocol.html. You are more than welcome to download it and get back to us to learn more if interested. So getting into it now. First of all, I really want to emphasize that the BD protocol doesn't stand alone. It's part of a broader group of tools and approaches and networks of people working in the space for many years. The key value added of the BD protocol is being a biodiversity impact accounting and reporting framework. It's really about helping companies consolidate impact data at the corporate level. It was developed by the NBBN, the National Business and Biodiversity Network of South Africa, housed by EWT, but it was really a group exercise. More than 40 co-authors have contributed. I want really to emphasize that the key benchmark for us was the greenhouse gas protocol in terms of aim, to be able to produce a guidance for business that will enable any company to basically put together impact information about biodiversity. So we really looked at the GHG protocol as a guidance document when we put together the BD protocol. However, we developed the BD protocol in alignment with a natural capital protocol, the Capitals Coalition. So I'm sure a few of you have heard about it, a very important document as well. We're really providing the measurement side of a natural capital protocol, trying to understand how do you measure and communicate changes in biodiversity from a business perspective. And finally, I want really to mention very briefly that the data that the BD protocol helps put together can be used in many different ways, but foremost, very important for science-based targets around biodiversity. Very important to get the real data around biodiversity, and also for any types of disclosures, from GRI-based disclosures to any other tools that you may use. So the BD protocol, who does it target? Well, it speaks to any business, from agribusiness to retailing to manufacturing to mining. Any sector is concerned, so it applies to any type of industry. It's also applicable to any value chain, from suppliers to clients to direct operations. However, the content is it's a technical report. It's quite heavy in terms of its content. We're really talking about a few different things that few people actually talk about at the same time. We're talking about business, biodiversity, ecosystem, species, but also about accounting, double entry bookkeeping, and disclosure. So we're really trying to put together a few different disciplines and themes, but hopefully it will speak to a few of you, and the journey forward is really to try to bring about a change in mindset and build capacity around this as well. But anyway, what is this about? It's about two main types of information. First of all, it's about impact on ecosystems and impact on species. I'm going to get back to that, but I want to emphasize one important thing. There are literally hundreds of ways of measuring changes in biodiversity. Many impact measurement tools and approaches out there. The BD protocol is there to support them, to provide an accounting framework so that you can actually consolidate impact data across your sites and operation. That's really the main purpose. So we've been working with a number of consulting companies throughout the world, in Europe, in South Africa, in Australia, trying to build a capacity so that they can actually use the accounting framework of the BD protocol within their daily practices. And hopefully we're going to share with you a couple of case studies after this. So what is the content? Very briefly, the BD protocol covers, first, how do you put together an impact inventory according to your organizational and value chain boundaries that you select. And your biodiversity impact inventory is basically composed of ecosystems and species, and we help you understand how to put these together. We also provide guidance on how do you assess impact on biodiversity. And most importantly, we bring in two key concepts in terms of biodiversity impact. The first one is the mitigation hierarchy and the concept of ecological equivalency. I'm going to come back to that as well a bit later. After we've gone through all of that, a very key component of the BD protocol is providing what we call a biodiversity accounting framework. It basically helps you build a biodiversity balance sheet and a biodiversity statement of performance, in short. And it's about recording gains and losses of biodiversity over time and space. Then it's about trying to help you validate or verifying your information, how you put all of this together. So provide some guidance on that. And then finally, we provide also some critical guidance on how do you communicate to your stakeholders about this. Very important to consider that, because biodiversity is not like climate change and very different from the JG protocol in that manner. So moving forward, I won't go into any details, but I just want to highlight a few key messages. First of all, very important to fully understand your operations. And for that, there's a number of ways to put together your organizational boundaries. There's an equity approach, there's a control approach. I won't lecture you on this, but basically it's very important to understand where your business fits in, because it will basically define the scope of your biodiversity impact inventory. Then it's about choosing the value chain boundaries, whether you want to focus on your direct operation, your supply chain, etc. And moving on this specific topic, I want to emphasize that the BD protocol doesn't force you to follow a specific journey. Any company is welcome to select the scope that matters to it. For instance, you might focus on suppliers upstream if you think it's much more material, much more important, or you can actually select two scopes, direct operations and downstream, for instance. But at the end of the day, two key principles there: direct and indirect impact. The BD protocol first requires you to focus on your direct impact. What do we mean by this? When there is a direct correlation between a change in biodiversity and your business operation. For instance, when there's a land use change, you can see a transformation of the ecosystem. Indirect impact is an option. You can choose to go that route as well, but it's not mandatory. Indirect impact, there's no clear direct correlation, but we all know that greenhouse gas emissions lead to biodiversity change, and you can also attempt to measure that, but you're not forced to. Very briefly again, the BD protocol is about two things: impact on ecosystems, and the BD protocol requires that we account for all impacts on ecosystems. However, for species, which are accounted separately, we only focus on the most important one to your business. On the right-hand side, there are only a few criteria that you can use. The BD protocol doesn't prescribe a specific way to select which are the most important species. We just provide guidance. So for instance, it may be that species may be protected by law, or it may be very highly threatened, red listed on the IUCN red list. It may be very important from a financial perspective because it costs your business money to manage. There's a number of reasons. But at the end of the day, it's about providing the reasoning and evidence why you choose that specific list of material species. Now, into some accounting principles. Hopefully I won't lose too many of you along that journey, but it's quite very important to understand that the BD protocol relies on accounting principles that come from financial accounting, from the JG protocol and the climate space, but has been tweaked so that it actually speaks to the biodiversity space. So typically relevance is critical. We need to have a biodiversity impact inventory that reflects the impact of your business on biodiversity. Second key principle, equivalency. When you talk about biodiversity impact, we need to assess net impact, gains and losses for biodiversity features that are equivalent. We cannot compare a forest with a meadow or a wetland with a forest. It doesn't work when we do net impact accounting. Another key principle is completeness. We need to report and account for all impacts. Consistency is also key. We should be able to use the same methodology throughout the impact inventory, throughout the operations. Transparency, it's really about recording all the different assumptions, all the different methods and limitations that you might find. Accuracy, quite obvious. There's a lot of choices that need to be made in terms of measurement methodologies, and it's always a tricky balance to find to produce accurate data versus less costly approaches. But anyway, very important to consider. And finally, that's a key thing, because the BD protocol is like an accounting framework. It lives after a single assessment. This is an ongoing exercise. We're talking about a time period assumption, like in financial accounting. So we're really trying to build a balance sheet of biodiversity impact through time. I won't bore you with all the different details, but basically the BD protocol is focused on mitigation hierarchy. It's based on no net loss as a key principle from a business and biodiversity offset program. And the focus really here is to understand that you can have both positive and negative impact as part of your impact inventory. Very briefly, the two key equations in the biological diversity protocol. First of all, on the left-hand side, you've got a statement of biodiversity position, which is your biodiversity balance sheet. It's basically boils down to, first of all, your total biodiversity footprint is equal to your positive biodiversity footprint plus your negative biodiversity footprint. And on the right-hand side, you've got your annual statement, which is about your net biodiversity impact for a single year, which is your gains minus your losses. Very happy to chat more about this at a later stage, but unfortunately we don't have much time, but these are the two key equations. Just going to give you a couple of examples. First, on ecosystems. What does this mean? We talk about headline KPIs for impact on ecosystems. The total biodiversity footprint is about the sum of all the surface areas of ecosystem within your impact inventory. And what is the biodiversity footprint which is positive? It's basically the sum of those surface area which have been adjusted for their condition. And the negative biodiversity footprint is the gap between the two, the total footprint minus the positive footprint. If you go look at the right-hand side of the screen, you will see if you got 100 hectares of wetland of condition 6 out of a maximum of 10, you got a total footprint of 100 hectares, a positive footprint of 60 hectares equivalent, and the gap, it's 100 minus 60, you got 40 hectares equivalent. This is, in a nutshell, how it works. But at the end of the day, for ecosystems, these can be added up across your site, across ecosystems. For species, it's different. We are accounting for species separately, individually, but the same principles apply. We've got a total biodiversity footprint, a positive one and a negative one. I'm just going to show you quickly the example. Let's assume that we've got two couples of crowned cranes breeding in a degraded wetlands, and we can estimate bias by science and the business context that there could be 6 couples in a restored wetland. The total footprint would be 6. The positive would be only 2 because it's a current breeding couples, and the gap would be 4. Thank you so much for listening. I know it was quite heavy and very quick. I hope you can learn more through the case studies that we're going to share with you right now. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Joel, for taking us through the journey there and giving us more details around it. Just to mention again, we've seen your questions in the box below. We will address them at the end of the session. We've got notes of all of them, so we will get the panelists to address them at the end of the session. Next up is Kishail Chetty. For those of you that don't know, EWT has had a partnership with Eskom for over 25 years, and the Eskom EWT partnership has really supported all the work around the BD protocol. Kish is part of the Eskom Biodiversity Center of Excellence and has been a really good supporter of the project and played a vital role in the completion of the case study. So over to you, Kish.
Great, thank you, Constance. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to actually present to you today two of Eskom's case studies relevant to the BDP. As we have quite a large and wide variety in terms of the audience, for those of you who are not aware, Eskom is a power utility within South Africa, and we provide electricity to just about 90% of the population. We do that through 30 power stations that we have, with a generation mix that moves from coal to nuclear, gas, wind, hydro, and pump storage. In addition to that, we also have just under 400,000 kilometers of power line. As an organization, our footprint, our impact on the environment is quite significant, or quite big and significant. And as a result, we have a very detailed and structured approach towards environmental management. Two of the key strategic objectives found within our environmental management strategy relate to the reduction of our environmental footprint, and also for us to be recognized as an environmental responsible and sustainable organization in the long term. In striving towards this, from a biodiversity perspective, Eskom has done a lot of work in terms of mainstreaming biodiversity into the business. We've done that at a strategic level. We've done that at an operational level. In terms of how we go about providing the business case for why biodiversity is relevant within the organization, we really utilize or make use of 6 key pillars. And these pillars are what are often referred to as Eskom's 6 C's. And essentially, they help provide the business case and the reasons behind why we can support biodiversity and undertaking biodiversity as an organization at various levels. These pillars include compliance, continuity of electricity supply, conservation, communities, corporate image, and cost to company. When Eskom were approached by our strategic partner, the Endangered Wildlife Trust, they came with the opportunity for us to engage through case studies in the Biodiversity Disclosure Protocol. And why did we do this? Why did we take it up? Very simply put, we want an opportunity as an organization to have access to different measures to actually measure our impact on biodiversity. And the BDP, as Joel has indicated, gives us an opportunity to consolidate our impacts and measure that accordingly, and also look at opportunities to track performance and report on that performance, both internally within our organization, but also externally to some of our key stakeholders. In terms of the case studies that we selected 2 particular sites. It's our Zero wind farm in the Western Cape and our Ngula pump storage scheme situated in KZN and Free State in South Africa. We specifically selected these sites because they had biodiversity requirements implemented in their authorizations. They also had good biodiversity data as a baseline, which would enable us to actually push forward with the case studies. And also, these particular sites had different types of infrastructure, from dams to power lines to turbines, which allowed us to look at a varying environment in terms of doing these calculations. When we did go out to conduct the assessment in terms of the protocol that Joel has indicated, there was a gap of information at both sites that we had to address. And we made use of our strategic partnerships with conservation NGOs, the Endangered Wildlife Trust for our Zero wind farm, and BirdLife South Africa for the Ngula pump storage scheme, to close those gaps and provide us with that additional information that would enable us to get a result. The methods that we employed, as Joel had indicated, really center around direct impacts from a biodiversity perspective and looking at the ecosystem footprints and the species relevant to those ecosystem footprints. And by doing that, the results are as follows. We were able to actually assess our positive impacts to be just under 52% for Ngula and just over 76% for the Zero wind farm. It's important to note at this point that behind this is very consolidated impact data relevant to the ecosystems that we looked at each of the sites. So there's a lot of material that goes into this. What I did for the purposes of this presentation is that we extrapolated the Ingula and Sierra footprints just to showcase how we could actually platform it as an example of what Eskom's positive and negative biodiversity impacts or footprint impacts might be. And in this case, Eskom's positive biodiversity footprint with respect to this particular study, just using a sample size of 2 sites, would be around 60% and just under 40% in terms of our negative biodiversity footprint. So what does this mean for us as an organization? Well, essentially, it gives us a way to consolidate our impacts with respect to biodiversity at our sites, looking at the positive and negative impacts, and further taking that forward, actually addressing those positive and negative impacts by implementing solid management action through management plans or action plans at our sites that will maintain and enhance biodiversity from a positive perspective, but also from a negative perspective, looking at those opportunities where changes to management structure, changes to our management action might enhance and improve biodiversity and thus overall improving our biodiversity footprint. We also, from this, are able to actually now measure and report on our biodiversity performance and track our performance internally through a different measure that is quite uniform and can be applied uniformly across each one of our sites. And I think that that's quite a critical thing, because we've often struggled with being able to look at a good key performance indicator that we could utilize to measure biodiversity and track biodiversity across all of our sites. And finally, taking this forward from an Eskom perspective, I think is going to be a critical component in terms of looking at the opportunities to start to distribute this or run this protocol at the different sites and assess what the opportunities are for us to actually improve upon our biodiversity. Additionally, in the long term, it gives us a chance as Eskom to have a uniform measure of showing an indicator of our performance from a biodiversity perspective with respect to ecosystems and species. I think I just want to also just highlight, in terms of the species work that we try to undertake here, there is a lot of detail that is required from a species perspective. And that detail was fairly easy for us from an ecosystem perspective to run the protocol, but from a species perspective, it was quite challenging in that you actually need quite detailed species understanding of your important species on the site to be able to relate that back to the ecosystem material. And that is certainly a gap that we would try and address by understanding some of our important species a lot better at these particular sites and sites going forward. But overall, it gives us an opportunity to platform Eskom in terms of our positive and negative impacts, and also looks at ways that we can enhance our management on the site and at a group level to improve upon our biodiversity footprint. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kish. Once again, just a reminder, just type your questions at the bottom. The easier questions we'll answer as we go along, and we're leaving some for the end, so there'll be some of the broader questions so we can answer all of them at the end for those of you that are interested. Next up, we have Sil Black from all the way from South Africa we're now heading towards Denmark, to Blankslef, if I'm correct, Sil, in Denmark, to look at the better energy pilot study. Over to you, Sil.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. So my name is Sil Black, and I work for Habitats, which is a Danish company, and we make landscape designs for improved biodiversity. So I'm really excited to be presenting this case study today. It's been about the synergy between renewable energy and biodiversity. So in a way, it's green energy squared. So it's something I really like. We have had this great opportunity to collaborate with and test methodology. And for an engineer like me, it's quite awesome to be able to quantify something as complex as biology and ecosystems, and then also translate it into business language. So the initial partners in this three-way collaboration, it was Better Energy and Habitats. So Better Energy, they make solar power plants, which is great for the climate, but it takes up space and it's not very pretty. So they were asking, can we use the space maybe to benefit nature and make the plant more attractive, for example, to neighbors? And of course, making space for nature is exactly what we do at Habitats. So the Blank Slip project, it was the first that we, Habitats and Better Energy, did together. It's a pilot project for integrating biodiversity and solar power. And this has developed into a really good partnership with several new projects in process. So if you take a look at the picture here, this is one of the designs at the Blank Slip site, where native plants, trees, and bushes has been selected for a variation to provide food and shelter for birds and animals, and also recreational areas for people, which can also help to increase the understanding of nature. So this is, of course, just the starting point. There's an intention to let nature take over and let it develop. However, there will be some natural processes that needs to be mimicked along the way. So this is the site we've been working on, the Blank Slip site. And if you look at the picture, this used to be intensely grown agriculture, so farm country with tilling, fertilized, use of biocides, really no life left. Now you see the solar panels in the main area. So what have we been doing? We've been looking at the spaces between and around the solar panels. We've been looking at the local geography, the soil conditions, nearby habitats, including several visits and biological observations in the area. And then we have designed a number of what we call points of impact, which is a variety of different ecosystem types. So dry sandy areas, wet lowlands, grassland, forest, and bushes. And we have also had a company event with Better Energy where they were spreading local seeds at selected places. So the solar panel field, it'll also be grazed by sheep. So when making a project like this, where you are testing how to integrate business and biodiversity, you can see the positive effects. And you know that in time there'll be more life, there'll be cleaner air, clean water. But how do we actually tell people about this and report it and show what we've been doing? And so we're interested in, can we actually show the effect of making these investments into biodiversity and maybe even make it profitable for both nature and business? So this is exactly what the biological diversity protocol can do. Having the data from the project, having the local conditions, the projected ecosystems, we decided to test the protocol methodology on the site. So the full case is available to download, and it's at Habitat's homepage and also on the protocol homepage. It's absolutely excellent. So I know that this is quite a busy slide, and don't worry, it's just to illustrate the methodology of the BD protocol. So Joel, he really talked very well through it and the principles. It's very throughout the protocol, and it gives step-by-step directions. The main steps here I just want to highlight is assessing the conditions of the ecosystem. In this case, it was many small ecosystems. And also we used a simple scoring system going from 0 to 5, where 1 was the completely transformed ground with no life, officially tilled and grown for years, so really transformed. And 5 being the natural state, never touched by human, plants, bees, birds everywhere, and a fully functional ecosystem. So working through the protocol, we ended up with the biodiversity footprint. If you look at the graph to the left, you can see that it's a scale from 1 to 100%, where 100% is equivalent to the untouched nature of all the area. And this is what we've used as reference. So prior to construction, it's the first hardly existing column, and it is the completely transformed ground that we started with. After just 1 year, the projection shows that we have reached a positive impact of 20% of the natural state. And after 30 years, we see a biodiversity gain of 61%. In the second graph, we have used the methodology in the protocol to assess the development of each ecosystem type on the site and see how it develops. So some of the takeaways is, of course, that it takes time, nature takes time, and also the results here have led to several beneficial discussions. So at the meeting where we presented the case to Better Energy, we got really great feedback and showing that the results could be used in several contexts. With, for example, in board meetings, presentation to the board, sustainability reporting, and also with communication with the stakeholders could be officials, could be neighbors, and several others. So truly, this has been an integration of biodiversity and business. And some of the other discussions we have had has been about how to monitor and possibly make adjustments to achieve functional ecosystems in a time period. In this case, it was 30 years. Could we use grazing animals? And if we did, how would we avoid overgrazing? And also, we've had discussion about if it's actually possible to achieve a natural state in a country like Denmark, which is completely cultivated. We have to know what an old tree looks like. And so we have also been discussing if we could include the threatened species. So in this case, we have not been using the species part of the protocol, but it's definitely possible. We've been talking about how to make new designs to improve the biodiversity, and also the importance of getting into the planning process early. And of course, there's the importance of being able to assess the value of biodiversity and in time be able to include the pricing for ecosystem services in our society. So it has been really exciting to take something as complex as biodiversity and ecosystems, and in the words of Rasmus Wilhelm, who is the CEO of Better Energy, make it easy to evaluate the efforts and understand them in a business context. So thank you for a really great partnership to both Joel and to Better Energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sol, for that information. I think it's really useful and explained a few of the questions below. So thank you very much for that and for joining us on this call. We really appreciate it. We're going to move over to the questions and answers now. I'm going to try and structure it such a way to involve the panelists quite a bit that I think it's relevant to. So if you guys just bear with me, I'm just going to look at some of the questions. I think one of the most important questions that came through is: can companies of any size use this protocol? Is this process resource intensive? Any specific skills needed? Joel, I think I'm gonna leave this one to you to answer, if that's all right.
Sure. So that's why we showed these two examples. Eskom has got a much bigger footprint than Better Energy. The two sites in themselves, if I recall correctly, are more than 14,000 hectares big. So it gives you an indication of that it can apply to big properties, and also to a much smaller one, which, if I recall correctly, is around 27 hectares. CLA, I'm not sure, I can't recall. And a much smaller project, much smaller company. And why is it possible? Because actually, most of the data I used in that smaller case study were from typical impact assessment that you use for compliance. So that's one of the key facts about the BD protocol. We use any type of impact data. It can be quite complex, like the global biodiversity score that was mentioned in the chat, that is also compatible with by Joshua. But we also use all the typical environmental impact assessment that are out there. And I think in terms of skill, of course, you do need biodiversity skills. If you can't rely on typical environmental managers with no understanding of how ecosystem and species work, that's for sure. But beyond that, there's definitely some capacity building required in terms of double entry bookkeeping. So Sile can attest to that. She was trained on the spot, and I think she's more than competent now. She's overtaken me, I think, in terms of doing this anyway. So thanks.
Thank you, Joel. I hope that answers your question, Simona. If not, we will give our details at the end. If you guys need more information, you're welcome to make contact with either Joel or myself, and we can answer some more questions. Kishayla, the next question is for you from Joel Atkins. Joel was asking, how did you gather the information on species to fill the gaps in order to execute the pilot study?
Okay, thanks very much, Jill. That's a good question. So at the two separate sites, we did look at what were our important species and what information was relevant with respect to those species in terms of understanding how those species or what the maximum population size of those species could be within the particular ecosystems that we had. And based on the species that we had at both sites, we were unable to actually look at species and be able to do this exercise at the Sierra wind farm. We looked at Ngula, and we had 9 important species that we had identified. And out of those 9 important species, only 5 of them had the information that would enable us to actually look at ecosystems and habitats that we have within the sites selected, and also get an understanding of what the maximum population size of that particular species would be. This is an area that we definitely, from an Eskom perspective, would need to do a lot more work in understanding more information around the particular species that we have, but also it's a South African concern as well, that we don't necessarily have that information from a background perspective to be able to influence and understand population sizes in particular habitats for certain important species. The only other thing I want to say is that species is quite a challenging measure in this case, in that you might have an opportunity to have 3 breeding pairs of wattle crane on a particular site because your ecosystems allow for that. The size of the habitat within the ecosystems allow for that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be your natural maximum number of species, because there's a lot of other factors that go into that. What it does do is it gives us an opportunity to utilize a species as an indicator for improving upon ecosystem, improving upon habitat management that would potentially lead towards that particular species increasing in population size or increasing in breeding pair size, for example. Thanks.
Thank you, Kish, for that thorough answer. So the next question is for you, from Joshua Berger. What were the guidelines used to assess the 1 to 5 status score for the BE case study? How do you define 100% remaining biodiversity in Denmark?
So what we have tried to do, and this was actually quite some discussions, because since we do not have much untouched nature, it's quite difficult to get an understanding of what is untouched nature, what is 100%. So we have been looking at different kind of factors and then putting them together, and of course looking for other countries. So it is our best guess. I hope that answers the question.
All right, no, thank you, Sil. I think that does answer the question. Thank you very much.
If I may just quickly react on this one. I think it's important to mention that there's a lot of guidance at the EU level on what constitutes a good quality habitat, especially for those that are listed. But at that specific site, none of, the land was so degraded that none of the listed habitat were present anyway. So it was difficult to use that as a reference state. Just wanted to mention that as for clarity.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks for that clarity on it. The next question, Joel, I think you can stay on for it. It's from PJ Stevenson. He's asking, I'm keen to know how much technical support a company needs to use the BD protocol. Can their staff usually apply it, or do they need specialized partners and or consultants?
Really, if you've got the time to do it yourself, to concentrate on understanding the methodology, I really think you need training on the accounting side. If you're environmental management with experience in biodiversity, you can do it yourself, definitely. But based on our experience, we find that typically it's easier to rely on external consultants, like in the case of Sile in Denmark, because they do this as part of the EI process or the compliance process, and the data is readily available. Or in the case of Eskom, they are basically, it's just an issue of time constraints and resources as well. People don't necessarily have the time to deal with that. So in that case, we provided that support. So my point is, if you've got the time, sure, you can learn. The methodology is free, available online. All of it is transparent, but you may need some capacity building in terms of accounting. So please do get in touch with us.
Thank you very much, Joel. As I said earlier, we will share our details at the end, so people have all the information to get in touch with the relevant persons. The next question is from Warren Funston. With there being so much choice for companies to set boundaries for what to include in a biodiversity assessment, do we run the risk of companies showcasing only their good side? Joel, I think you would once again be the best person to answer this.
So I think it's a fair comment, but the primary objective of the BD protocol is to provide a standardized accounting framework. So it's a tool. You can use it in a good way or a bad way. And in this specific context, if you respect and if you adhere to the reporting and accounting principle, your results should be standardized and comparable across any company in the world, any sector, any industry. So what that means, if one of your competitors showcase or advertise a much better biodiversity footprint than yours, you should question the data quite easily. I'm just going to give you an example. If you're thinking about the financial sector and you see companies talking about their direct operations only, it doesn't make a lot of sense compared to another who talk about the client side. That's just a simple example, and it will apply to many other sectors, from retailers. So at the end of the day, the structure is standardized, and it should make things easier to compare, like for the JG protocol. However, we're not forcing anyone to do it in any specific way, and I think that's important. It's a completely voluntary tool, but at the end of the day, if you use it properly by looking at the different principles, I think it should help make data much more robust, reliable, and accurate.
Okay, thanks, Joel. I think that answers most of the questions. We do have a number of questions still in the chat box. My suggestion is that we will get in touch with those people that still had questions. And like I mentioned before, I try to give everybody an opportunity and run them through all the panelists. So for those remaining, I think we will have your details and we will answer them via email for those participants that we did not get to. So yeah, finally, just in closing, I think, you know, there's a lot of people to thank when something like this comes together. You know, and obviously, as mentioned right from the start, you know, Eskom, you know, they've supported this journey and funded most of the work that we needed to do around this. So especially for Kish, who presented a case study, Kishail Chetty, Warren Funston, who's also on the call, and Deirdre Herbst, who was the head of the environmental division at Eskom. Thank you so much for all your support. I think we've got a really nice without you guys, it would not be possible. And then definitely the lead author as well. I think Joel has put a crazy amount of work into this, into the BD protocol itself. And I think he can be really proud of all of us can be really proud of the product that's on the table at the end of the day. So thank you very much. And then obviously the EWT team that made today possible, past and present. Jolan Friedman, the CEO, who spoke first and did the introduction for us. Then Megan, who's put this all together for us and made sure that it all went very smoothly, and she supports me and Joel a lot around all the technical stuff that we always not so great at. So thank you very much, Megan. And then also Yves Manana, who's the IT person at EWT. Thanks so much for doing all the work behind the scenes and making sure that everything went smoothly today. And there's also Shelley Lizio, who's on the call, I saw. Thanks, Shelley, for all the work that you've done over the years, and also for the contributions that you made. So, yeah, thank you very much to everybody. Like I said, we'll answer the calls or some of the questions that we did not get to. We'll email you guys and give you some of the answers to it. There is the details on the screen over here, Joel's details, who's at the top over there. Then my details down there. Happy to help everybody. And there, right below, is the link to the BD protocol online. So you guys can look there, www.nbbdp.org, and you guys can go to that. And then that's where you can access the BD protocol online. So thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate all the support. And like we said, please, if you want to engage any further with with Joel or myself or the EWT, have any questions around the BD protocol or the BDP, the Biodiversity Disclosure Project as a whole, please get in touch with us and we'll get back to you ASAP. Thanks for joining, everybody, and thanks for all the support.
Bye.